Chapter 4 Park. Owen Campbell Moore was a dreadlocked Jamaican who worked as a groundsman at the playing fields a couple of kilometres from the zoo. Gabriel and Michael found him on a deck chair inside his lockup with his socked feet resting on a ride-on mower. There was damp in the air, mixed with the smell of cut grass and fumes from a Calla gas heater. "How are me young lovers today?" Owen asked cheerfully, as he touched fists with Michael. When he stood up, his giant woolly hat brushed the corrugated roof. "We're good?" Michael nodded, as Gabriel smiled in agreement. "And life in the zoo?" Owen asked. He'd lived there himself a dozen years earlier, and always made a point to ask. "In bloody sane, as always," Gabrielle smirked. "Girl cut herself in the bathroom 2 nights ago and they still haven't cleaned up." Owen shook his head and sucked air between his teeth. "My old home, I miss it so," he said, before bursting into laughter. "So, you here for the K-bag? You know, I almost tell on me ass when Major D called up so early." "Same here," Michael nodded, as Owen guided his socks into a pair of muddy workman's boots and stood up without bothering to tie the laces. He put on a pair of gardening gloves before grabbing keys from a catering-sized coffee can and strolling outside towards the men's changing block. Owen wore his jeans down low, with his boxers showing, but it was a younger man's look and it didn't seem right. Gabriel followed Owen and Michael into the tiled men's changing room. The floor was covered with chunks of dry mud stamped out with the shape of football studs, and she could see past the clothes hooks and benches into a toilet cubicle with damp tissue across the floor and diarrhea sprayed up the seat. "Ugh, do you need me in here?" she said, gagging on the combo of old sweat and blocked toilet. "Wait outside," Owen snorted, as he grinned at Michael. "It's not really suited to the delicate nostrils of females in here." As Owen stepped onto a metal changing bench and reached up to grab a kilo of cocaine from behind a ceiling tile, Gabrielle backed into the crisp March air. She tried to wipe the foul smell from memory as she buried her fists in the front pockets of her hoodie and studied the cold breath curling in front of her face. The playing fields were deserted, except for a dude 30 metres away, sitting on a concrete bench behind a set of goalposts. He was a little older than Gabrielle, maybe 17. Adidas tracksuit, with a bike flat on the pavement in front of him and a mobile phone touching a cheek covered in zits. She wouldn't have given him a second glance, but for his shocked expression when he realised she was looking his way. He snapped his phone shut, sprang off the bench, and wobbled all over the place as he began pedalling away. "All set," Michael said, zipping the bag of white powder into a feeler pack. He handed it over to Gabrielle as Owen locked up the changing room. "Do you recognise that guy on the bike?" she asked, but the rider had disappeared into the glare of the low sun. "Nicer doing business, Owen," Michael said, waving as the giant Jamaican and his trailing bootlaces headed back towards his hut. "Maybe I'll catch you in the green pepper?" "Not tonight," Owen smiled, looking back over his shoulder as he headed for his lockup. "Me girl Erica goes to college. I got 3 babies to look after." "Sounds a blast," Michael said, as he and Gabrielle started walking towards the gates. "I think we're being followed," Gabrielle whispered. But Michael wasn't convinced. "Are you sure? I mean, you're pretty paranoid. I remember that time we came out of the bowling alley on campus and..." Gabrielle practically growled. Just one time she'd thought some guy was following them back to campus, and ever since, Michael had accused her of being paranoid about everything. "It's not like that," she snapped. "That spotty dude can't have been expecting me to come out of the changing room straight away. You should have seen the look on his mug. And he climbed on that bike like he had a hot spud up his rear end." Michael glanced around. "Well, we can't do much except keep our wits, and we're doing that anyway." "I know," Gabrielle nodded, as she swung the pack over her back. "But I thought this was dodgy, and now I really think this is dodgy." "Who could he be?" Michael asked. Gabrielle shrugged. "He had that whole chavvy thing going on. He looked like a runt." Michael shook his head. The Runts were a youth gang who all came out of a couple of estates on the opposite side of town. They dealt drugs, stole cars, and burgled houses, but they were mostly just tearaways. Even the leaders were barely out of their teens. "Too sophisticated," Michael said. "You're suggesting that Runts are going to send some dude into the Green Pepper to set up a sale, then keep tabs on all of Major D's couriers so that they can find where he keeps his stash?" "Okay, you're right," Gabrielle said irritably. "It's way too sophisticated for the Runts. But I'm telling you, it's not me being paranoid. That dude flipped out when he saw me." "Could be a cop," Michael said. Gabrielle shrugged. "Too young to be on the drug squad, but I suppose it could be an informant. Or some other gang. I mean, Major D's double-crossed everyone, from the Russian mafia to his own uncle." "Do you think we should call Chloe again?" "What's the point?" Gabrielle asked. "She's a mission controller, not a miracle worker. I know what she'll say. We can go ahead and deliver the drugs, or pull out if we think it's too dangerous. But the second we go missing with a kilo of Major D's coke, he's going to want our heads on a platter." By this time, Michael and Gabrielle were out of the playing fields and walking beside a breeze block wall, with a parade of small shops across the street. The Green Pepper Cafe was less than 3 minutes' walk, but they were both on edge. "Are we going to make this call about the police car, or not?" Michael said, as he slid his mobile from his jeans. But Michael didn't get a chance. He heard something behind him and turned to see 3 bikes speeding down the pavement towards them. The tracksuited riders had scarves over their faces, but Gabrielle glimpsed enough to recognize one from a police surveillance photo. He was a runt called Aaron Reed, a 22-year-old who'd done 3 years in youth custody after beating a schoolmate almost to death. As the bikes closed in, Michael broke into a run whilst Gabrielle jumped off the curb, shielding herself between 2 closely parked cars. 2 bikes whizzed on to get Michael, but the lad she'd eyeballed in the park threw his bike down and pulled a wooden-handled kitchen knife from inside his jacket. "Give us the pack," he ordered. Gabrielle stepped backwards into the road and was horrified to see that the knife was smeared with fresh blood. But it was one-on-one. Gabrielle had passed Cherub's advanced combat course and reckoned she could handle him. She backed into the middle of the road as the guy closed her down. Meanwhile, Michael had disappeared around the corner with the 2 bikes on his tail. "Hand over the coke, and you can walk." "Kiss my ass, Spotty," Gabrielle scoffed as an approaching car blasted its horn at her. As the driver got close, he realized that Gabrielle had a knife pointed at her, but he just cut into the opposite lane and kept on going. "You're a big spotty chicken," Gabrielle goaded. "You haven't got the guts." The runt made a clumsy lunge. Gabrielle sidestepped before snatching his wrist and twisting his arm up behind his back. The giant blade clattered to the ground as she kneed him ferociously in the balls and turned him around to smash the side of his head against the front wing of a Fiat Tipo. The first blow left him dazed. The second left a dent in the bonnet and a dead weight in her hands. She let go, and the runt slumped into the road, to the obvious surprise of a man emerging from the halal butcher's shop across the street. Gabrielle looked around to make sure she was out of danger. She was torn about what to do next. Her heart wanted to go after Michael, but her brain knew there wasn't much chance of catching up before he reached the green pepper, and she was all too aware of the blood smeared over the knife. Whose blood? A crowd was gathering across the street as she began sprinting back towards the playing fields. As she burst through the squeaky metal gate, Gabrielle noticed that the doors of both men's changing rooms had been kicked in. Her nightmare was confirmed when she rounded a corner and opened the door of the lockup. Owen was face down on the concrete with a pool of blood around his head. He was a big man, but he'd been surprised by the runts and his throat had been slashed with the giant knife, killing him instantly. Gabrielle realised she was in deep trouble. Not only was she standing at a crime scene, but she'd been seen in the area by witnesses. Cherub could pull her off the mission and tamper with the evidence so that she was never linked with the crime, but she'd be a suspect, and the very fact that witnesses had seen her could muddy the evidence enough and make convicting the real killers impossible. Gabrielle realised she had to leave the area fast, then call up Chloe and tell her that Michael was probably still in danger. Death is always shocking, and she trembled as she backed out of the lockup. Then she jumped with fright as a door slammed less than 10 meters away, followed by a youth's voice. "We've got 2 kilos, and Aaron should have got the bag from the black girl by now." Another voice. "Sasha's boy said there'd be a lot more than 4 kilos. "Well, where is it? We've looked already." Gabrielle crept back inside the lockup. It sounded like 5 or 6 runts were stepping out of the changing rooms. She realised that her urgent desire to know if Owen was safe had made her careless. It made perfect sense that a small team of runts would go after the K-bag hooked on her back, while a larger team searched the changing rooms for Major D's main stash. But they were out of sight, and it sounded like they were leaving. "I'm out of here before the cops arrive," the most dominant sounding runt said. "Sod that," a younger voice said, maybe only 13 or 14. "We haven't searched the birds' changing rooms yet. There could be another 20 grand's worth of coke stashed above those ceiling tiles. I'll tell you what, Shorty, you stay here and get done for murder when the pigs turn up. I'm going to head home and start snorting this lot." There were some laughs and a few jeers. The lads were egging one another on, and it sounded absurdly casual, as if they were busting each other's balls over the football results rather than robbing a drug dealer and murdering his associate. "You know what else?" another boy said. "I need a snap of that dead Rasta man on my mobile before we get out of here." The lads all laughed like they thought this was a great idea. "You'd better not let your little sister find it." There was a round of laughter, followed by, "Remember that time your mum found the pictures of Brenda's boobs?" Back in the lockup, Gabrielle considered bursting out and making a run across the fields. But there were at least half a dozen boys, and they had bikes, which she wouldn't be able to outrun. One of the boys started singing to the tune of 10 Green Bottles as they walked towards the lockup. "One dead Rasta stabbed inside a shed. One dead Rasta stabbed inside a shed." His mates laughed as Gabrielle glanced around at Owen's tools. The runts were going to find her within a few seconds, and she desperately needed a weapon.